Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. We have got an incredible program lined up for you today. We are going to be talking about the push-pull factors leading to out-migration with an expert in this topic, someone who's seen it with her own eyes. We're talking about District Governor Elaine Hernandez for Rotary District 5930 here in the Rio Grande Valley. So we're going to hear from her and our Sandra Sanchez, South Texas correspondent, in just a minute. But first, let's take a look at some of the things making headlines across the border. Starting with this morning, officials confirmed that they've arrested a 22-year-old Utah man in connection with the death of Charlie Kirk, who was shot on Wednesday at a Utah college. Now, the Utah governor identified the man as Tyler Robinson. There he is on your screen there. And the governor said that Robinson had become, quote, more political in the run-up to the shooting. Now, Kirk was shot as he spoke to a crowd gathered in a courtyard at Utah Valley University in Orem, Utah. Robinson's father actually recognized him from the photos released by authorities and confronted his son. And then Robinson confessed to being the person in those photos, with his father encouraging him to turn himself in. Robinson reportedly told his father that he would rather die by suicide than surrender. He was ultimately arrested by the U.S. Marshal Service on suspicion of capital murder, weapons, and obstruction offenses. Also happening, staying on the topic of the death of Charlie Kirk, a top State Department official on Thursday warned foreigners in the United States against praising the death of Kirk. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau said on the social platform X that he has directed our consular officials to undertake appropriate action. He went on to say, quote, "Please feel free to bring such comments by foreigners to my attention so that the State Department can protect the American people," end quote. Since President Trump's return to the White House, you may remember that the administration, and we've talked about this here on this program, the administration has revoked more than 6,000 student visas. The administration has targeted international students specifically participating in pro-Palestinian campus protests, claiming that those people exercising their First Amendment rights are a threat to national security. Some students have challenged the deportation proceedings. Also happening, a federal judge has ordered President Donald Trump's administration to update its Immigration Services website to reflect 600,000 Venezuelans with temporary protected status are legally allowed to live and work in the United States. The order went into effect immediately. Venezuelan TPS holders say they are stuck in detention centers and unable to work because the website does not reflect the judge's order. Now to bring in our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez, into the mix, along with our guest for today, District Governor for Rotary District 5930 here in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas, Elaine Hernandez. Hey, Sandra. Hi, Elaine.
Hey, Rudy. Thanks for having us. And welcome, Elaine. Thanks for being on the show.
What a joy. Thank you for the opportunity.
Elaine, you have a long, storied history, a career. You are a public health professional educator, international development specialist. I'm going to read down just a little list of some of the things you have. Right now, you oversee 16 Rotary clubs in 16 South Texas counties. You've been president of 3, 2 in McAllen, 1 in Mission, probably more. You've lived in Honduras at different times, helping residents there, and you ran a border tuberculosis and prevention project in Mexico in the early 2000s. Former director of border health with the Lower Rio Grande Valley Development Council. You also recently have been in Ukraine helping war victims, and you even wrote a book. Today, we're here to talk about the push and pull factors that are drawing migrants to the U.S. border and possible solutions. And you've seen this firsthand. You lived in Honduras from 2008 to 2013, right before this most recent mass event of migration that we have seen that has affected us here in South Texas. You witnessed people leaving. What caused people to leave? And tell us a little bit about what you saw and experienced.
Well, I had the opportunity to serve in Honduras with Red Cross. And so we were promoting a maternal and child health program. And while we were working in nearly 230 rural, isolated villages, we started to notice things like one day the men of the village were no longer there. And the following year, the mothers were no longer in the village and the grandparents remained with the grandchildren. And we were thinking, what is going on? Of course, you know, when we talk about the push-pull factors of migration, goodness, the principal one, I think, for the push is the hunger, poverty, lack of opportunities. And we can see in this slide, this was actually a drawing that a migrant family had made for me as I was trying to collect their stories from Honduras.
And what did you do with these stories? Did you send them back to the United States? Did you what did you do with them? Collect them for the Red Cross?
Do you know this is called photo voice? And maybe we'll get into that later, but it really is a powerful way of telling stories from the point of view of the person directly impacted. And these people were talking about why they left, what they hoped for, and how they returned to Honduras, and now what are their hopes and dreams in the future.
Let's go back to when you said one day all the men were gone. And then, how did that economically affect the town? How did that affect families? Did they talk about it before they left, or did they just all leave?
When you're poor and you're looking for sources of income to look after your family, what do? If there is no work where you live, if there are problems, many of them are farmers, and there was no water, so they had drought that were killing their crops, and they just felt desperate. What do you do? So they looked to traveling north because others had done that. And also, there was a system of what I call travel agents. These were people that lived in these villages that said, oh, it's easy to migrate. Well, I'll help you. Well, and they started to open up opportunities. But these farmers, many of them were farmers, they were from the rural area. They ended up having to borrow a great deal of money in order to be accompanied on these journeys north. So way back then in 2008, 2009, when I was working in Honduras, and we were noticing the men would start to travel north. It was so sad to also hear of the tragedies along the way. So it was a difficult journey, and they knew it was difficult, but they were so desperate.
These were kind of the precursors to what we call today's traffickers, the people who helped to facilitate their travel. Did they take a cut from it, or did they?
No, they had to pay up front. So back then it was probably $5,000. Then it became $10,000. Then it became $15,000 that these people, very often they actually sold their house. But these traffickers would start with, we can help you. You've got a motorcycle. I can help you sell the motorcycle. Oh, you've got a refrigerator. Oh, and you've got an iron. I can help you sell that. And bit by bit, they would sell things and then start to collect money. And then they were told, no, but you owe a larger amount of money to go north, but we'll help you. You know what? I have a friend who's a lawyer who will just take over the ownership of your house. And when you're up in the United States, you can send money back, pay off the debt, and you'll get your house back again.
I did see one of your photo voice where a person had been deported within 2 hours and returned to their home and said, I no longer own it, because they had spent all their money to travel north.
And what was interesting about that person who participated in this photo voice campaign was she told her story, but we had a public event where she told her story to the local elected officials. And after she told her story and she had the whole audience in tears, the mayor came up and said, I can help you find some housing now. So the power of storytelling is remarkable in that these individuals find their voice and they find that they are empowered to look for their solutions to their issues that's going on.
But you mentioned a lot of these people are very poor, probably don't have much education, and almost had to go public shaming in order to get some attention to their plight.
Well, because they were so convinced about their story that it was a moment of pride, actually, not of shame. And because they found their voice, they found their dignity, and then people began to look on them and said, how can I help you? That was remarkable.
What about the children? I'm curious. Those, you mentioned grandparents taking care of the children. What did that do to the family structure of these villages?
Can you imagine how families were torn apart, basically? The father left. Then later, the mother would leave. Then the children are being raised by the grandparents. That is a very stressful time. when my children went off to university, I was sad. Can you imagine how sad these children are when their parents leave, knowing that their parents may come home again, may be able to send money, or might not return. So,
the slide that's up right there caught my curiosity when you sent it. They had to pay to go to southern Honduras. And you mentioned they didn't have much money. So what were these fees like?
well, for example, in the individuals who were entering as undocumented into Honduras, they were coming from Venezuela. They were coming from Nicaragua. They were coming from other countries. And in fact, some were coming from countries in Africa. And they were coming through South America and then migrating north. Well, here's an example. This was a Venezuelan that was caught in the town. He couldn't go further north. They fined him $250 because he entered without proper documents. And so he had to stay begging in that community to raise the $250 before he could then be released to head north to continue his journey. So yeah, it was a real challenge. But these are people who are resilient. I stress that word because the challenges that they face, they overcome, and they take one step at a time. And they're very faithful, they're hopeful, and they keep trying.
You mentioned some of the countries they came from. What you saw migrants from? How many countries? Can you name some more? You mentioned Venezuela, Nicaragua, but I mean, did they come from Brazil and Haiti? And because we saw a huge, thousands come from Haiti, but many had made their way to Brazil and stayed there after, the hurricane many, many years ago, and went to Brazil, and then it took them many years to come north. Did you see a lot of Brazilians, Haitians? What did you see?
Well, from all around the world. Isn't that interesting? I saw data at the border, also here at the border, that showed over 90 countries where people were from originally and were being detained. So it was a huge global migration issue. Now today we're just focusing on Central America and Central Americans, but all of them have overcome great difficulties to try and make it to the border, but very often are returned back and have to go home again.
All right. Well, we're going to continue this conversation in just a moment. We got to take a quick break. Elaine, we're speaking with District Governor for Rotary District 5930 in South Texas, Elaine Hernandez, on the factors that factor into migration. Stay with us. Border Report Live will be back in 1 minute. And welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. Speaking of South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez joining us today, and we have a very special guest, District Governor Elaine Hernandez. She's the District Governor for Rotary District 5930 here in South Texas, but has a long, long resume that has a lot to do with immigration.
Elaine, we've been talking a lot about the factors that pushed people north, but we want to talk about some of the pull factors, why they stayed, and you have helped migrants here on the border. So, tell us, you mentioned earlier some of the remittances and some of the ways that they help to support people back home, but what are some of the pull factors that keep migrants here?
Well, let's talk about remittances. I was just looking at the data recently. Last year, $67.6 billion were sent in remittances to Mexico. And that represented about just under 4% of their economy, their GDP. Guatemala last year received nearly $22 billion in remittances being sent from their family members up here back home. And that represented nearly 20% of their economy. And then Honduras, just under $10 billion, $9.5 billion went to Honduras last year. And you can see from the chart how it was growing year after year. And that represented, just over a quarter of their economy. And finally, with El Salvador, $8.5 billion went to El Salvador, representing a quarter of their economy also. So you can see that the issue of the money that goes back is so important for the country itself. And so how difficult it is to sort of cut off that money that the families have been relying on when their members go back home. So what is part of this solution? Part of the solution is helping to develop the economies of these countries. And Rotary has been involved with some projects in community development. I'm really particularly proud of one that's called Guatemala Thrive. And I think there's a slide on that. But, they've so many young people from Guatemala and young families have left Guatemala, but they're returning home, but they do not have work where they're from. And so this particular project called Thrive, Guatemala Thrive, you can had 4 components to it. If we look at that next slide, we have had a global grant that was looking at clean water, and then they got a global grant that was looking at supporting a preschool. And then they had a global grant to build a computer lab during COVID so children could go to school still virtually. And then they had a health project. Well, this same community, supported by Rotary and supported by a community organization that is called, AID, is an organization, Shella Aid is an organization that is now investing economically in this highland region of Guatemala. They're helping to bring a shoe factory that's going to provide 2,000 jobs. So that means that those people who are returning to Guatemala from that area now will be able to find work. They want to go home. They want to be reunited with their families. They want to give opportunities to their children. So with these investments that Rotary has been supporting, they are improving the education system, they are improving access to health, and they're improving access to job training and jobs that are bringing dignity back to the family, bringing an income so that the families can thrive in Guatemala, in their community, and will not have to travel abroad. And we just wanted to mention Diego's story. The reason why he had taken the journey north of the United States was he said, I didn't want my mother to die on a dirt floor. So he was able, while he's been in the United States, to send money home to build a home for his mother. But now he's ready to go back, knowing that there will be a job for him when he returns.
I'm curious, in the current administration, I'm wondering, Rotary has stepped up and obviously helped to make these donations, make these grants, make these opportunities. The United States federal government is shutting down a lot of money that they are sending to these countries, and the way migrants are allowed, legal pathways into the country right now. I mean, are you continuing to step up these efforts, and do you find it more difficult in today's administration?
Well, first of all, Rotary is non-political and non-denominational. So we don't look at the politics. What we are looking at are local solutions to local problems by forming these partnerships. And we're finding that people are ready to step up. Both Guatemalans and Americans are coming together to find these solutions, to fund these solutions.
And how do you find some of these partnerships just from being on the ground, word of mouth? I mean, how do you come up with these places that you help?
Well, the Rotarians in the country of origin, they are the boots on the ground. They know their community. So the Rotary clubs in Guatemala know what their issues are. They work with those communities, and they look, because Rotary is an international network of volunteer humanitarian servant leaders. That's a big mouthful. But we are all committed to working together to find the solutions both at home here and abroad. So by bringing Rotarians and non-Rotarians, which are faith-based, for-profits, non-profits, local governments together at the table, That's what Rotary does.
You mentioned the remittances for those countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. That's known as the Northern Triangle, and those have been for years areas where we have seen high migration numbers. So it makes sense. You have a population of people down there who know it on the ground. They can send you back this information. That's a good handoff.
And Guatemala is one of those countries that receives most of what we call the global grant applications. They manage maybe 70 large-scale projects a year, and up here in South Texas, we manage one a year.
Okay, all right. And tell us about this project, the Guatemala Thrive. That's the project that you mentioned up here.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, we're actually coming up with an international peace summit in October in Brownsville, and we're going to be showcasing projects. We're calling it an international project fair, and we'll be showcasing all these different projects from around the world that are looking for funding. And this Guatemala Thrive is one of those that has demonstrated sustainability, impact, long-term investment, and long-term commitment, both by Rotarians and what we call the community organization that is supporting them, which is Shella Aid.
I also want to switch gears to be on this side of the border as well, because you serve as part of the poverty initiative with Hidalgo County. Hidalgo County here is to the west of us. We're here in Cameron County right now, but is geographically a very large county. We have a lot of migrants here. We have a big problem with poverty in this county. And tell us about some of the work that you're doing there, as well as the work that you did with Baylor and the collaborative.
So let's call it Prosperity Task Force,
okay,
which brings a different focus from the Poverty Task Force. With Prosperity, so one of the focuses that Rotary is playing on this task force is supporting mentorship of young people. We have a large population, maybe 25,000 young people in Hidalgo County, for example, that are disconnected. They don't go to school and they don't work. They are the neither nor generation.
That's a good way to put it.
Through mentoring, that Rotarians can provide this mentorship. We provide scholarships. We encourage young people to go back, complete their high school, continue on, becoming a professional, become that welder or become that teacher or become that doctor, whatever your dream is. We help young people to identify their passion, their dream, and to find a way to fulfill that passion.
Regardless of their immigration status or how they came.
They are young people living here, so everyone deserves a chance.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, but we are almost out of time. We're going to take a really quick break, Elaine, but stay with us and we'll wrap things up on the other side. You're watching Border Report Live. We'll be back in 1 minute. And welcome back to the program. My name is Rudy Mireles. I'm your host. South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez joining us. And also we have Elaine Hernandez, District Governor for Rotary District 5930 in South Texas. We only have about 2 minutes left, so I think we got time for one more question.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about your book. Elaine, you also have written a book. I mean, you have a very long bio, but tell us about this book. I think it's a children's book, right?
Absolutely. I wrote this children's story called Her Butterfly Effect. And it really is about a community of farm animals and how they come together to solve their problems on the farm at the same time of helping a flock of monarch butterflies that are migrating south down to their winter hibernation spot. So telling stories like this, yes, it's a children's story, but it's also a story about, for adults, how does a community come together to assist people who might be migrating through their community? So this takes place in Mexico, and it was sort of directed towards that audience, but it was based on my life living in Mexico on a dairy farm long time ago.
Wow, so many similarities to life here because obviously, butterflies migrate over the border. We have a huge population here of monarchs. We have the National Butterfly Center here, and we've been spending the past half hour talking about migration. So it may be a children's book, but it sounds like it's for adults too. We thank you so much for taking the time to join us today here in the studio. Rudy?
Yeah, thank you so much, Elaine. Looking forward to this. Hopefully we can call on you at some other point in time because you have so much knowledge that we didn't get to crack into today, but we appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. And before we go, a couple housekeeping things to remind you of. We want to remind you to check out our partners at Political Power Ranker. It's a weekly show tracking the movers, shakers, and rule makers in American politics. Nextstar's Director of Political Content, Chris Berg, and Director of Emerson College Polling, Spencer Kimball, are going to break down who's up and who's down in the world of politics based on one of my favorite things, data. This week's episode is actually focusing on the mayoral race in New York City, which if you've been following that at all, you know it's a hotly contested one. So make sure to check it out. You can find more on Political Power Ranker at abc27.com or your local Nexstar station's website. Also, don't forget about us. You can stay informed on the story shaping the U.S.-Mexico border in podcast form now. We're bringing you real-time updates, expert insights, and voices from both sides of the border. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, and both video and audio versions on YouTube. And that is going to do it for us today. That was Sandra Sanchez. My name's Rudy Mireles. Until Monday, have a great day.